one thing I would ask for your audience to think about, like if they're a franchisee or even a franchisor, is if your people are not happy and the culture is not right, how well is your brand doing? And that's food for thought. And I'm sure if most people can answer that themselves. So,
and I think another piece on the power is the power of influence.
Yes.
The power of who holds the power to influence the reputation of the brand. And at the end of the day, franchisors do, obviously, with things like leading strategy, but franchisees do as well, because they are the piece that executes that strategy.
Yes.
Okay, I agree.
And then understanding the business model of the brand. So that can look in every franchise very differently, even if they're similar franchises from QSR to QSR. One pizza brand is not the same as the other, or, hamburger joint the same as the other. So you have to understand the business model and have the franchisee that is now learning the business understand the business model, because they bought into a brand because the model hopefully works.
Hello and welcome to Hot Perspectives, the show. My name is Maliesa Cadigan. I am founder and coach at Hot Perspectives, where I inspire people to take a hot look at the opportunities in franchising. What do I mean by a hot look? Well, we look at the processes, that's HR, operations, and training, that help businesses run. And we also talk to people. And we do that by encouraging courageous, honest, open, and transparent conversations with franchise leadership. I am thrilled to launch this show so that I could provide a space to host conversations that are impacting the industry today. I've met some great people over 2 decades of experience in franchising, and I'm looking forward to inviting guests to share their perspectives and, who knows, maybe teach you something. Today, I am so excited to welcome Roger Peterson. He is the entrepreneur and founder behind Pro Entrepreneur Services, where he helps businesses grow and thrive. Welcome, Roger. Please tell us a little bit more about you and the fantastic work that you do in franchising.
Thank you for having me on, Maliesa. I'm excited to be here because I know you're passionate, and some of the topics we're going to cover is going to be, things that are not often talked about in the industry, but to get the information out there for people who have, are still learning their way in their path through the industry, and some things that they may not know. Let's discuss it. Pro Entrepreneur Services, I've been in the industry of franchising world for almost 2 decades, helping brands from the biggest franchises in North America to startup entrepreneurs from Vancouver to Toronto down to Atlanta and all parts in between. So I'm always excited to get people information to help them scale and grow their businesses. So excited to talk to you today.
Awesome. We met just last year, maybe 6 months ago, and something that stood out to me about you, Roger, is how you are able to look at the numbers and tell a story with those numbers. Can you tell us a little bit about the work you do in terms of analysis of a business and getting it ready to scale?
Yeah, I think for everything, stakeholders get into business for the bottom line, right? Which is money. So
in it to make money.
So when you look at a business and you're talking about all these elements that we're going to talk about today, what does it really lead back to? How is it affecting your bottom line? And being able to equate those things to say, hey, whether it's people in culture, tariffs, whatever else is going on with your business, how does it relate to your bottom line? So that's one of the things that I intimately do when I'm looking at a business and saying, hey, these are the things that you can implement and change to help you grow your business or your franchise system.
Awesome. And I think one of the key words that you used there was culture, and how that has an impact on the bottom line. And as you know, I'm very passionate about building inclusive franchise brands. I believe it's the way to empower people, to elevate systems, and really unlock growth. So I'm happy that you're here, and I'm looking forward to diving into some hot topics.
Yeah, for sure.
Yes. So I got a little game, a little fun for us. It's your first time on the show. So, what we typically do is we put some questions into this little baggie right here. And we just ask for your honest perspective, your honest, open, and transparent perspective on whatever topic we choose to take out of the bag.
Excellent.
So, over to you to pick our first question.
Right. So, I get to choose?
Yeah.
All right.
All
there
right.
You go.
Thank you. So we've got our first question. Let's get into it. Developing business coaches. That's what we're going to talk about. The question is, who does it benefit the most? Franchisee, franchisor?
All right. So that's an excellent question. And, my take is that nothing is binary. There's always gray. So you say franchisee, franchisor, but I think when we talk about it, you're missing the main person in it. Is the actual business coach, right? So franchisee, franchisor, business coach. So there's three parties actually involved. So when you say who does it benefit most, first of all, I think it benefits the business coach first.
Okay.
As you know, business coaches come in expecting to do a lot of things, and they may not have all the tools in their box to complete the jobs that they need. So developing them, they usually get a lot out of it. Even if they exit the system and move on, they get the most out of it. Now you talk about the stakeholders who benefited from it too, the entrepreneur and the franchisor and the franchisee. They both have a vested interest of developing that business coach as well. So that's my starting point.
Okay. I have a little bit of a different take on it. I believe developing business coaches has the biggest impact on the brand. And I'll tell you what I mean by that. So I have almost 2 decades of experience in business coaching, mainly with QSR brands. I've had the opportunity to work with some smaller emerging brands like you have, as well as some national, international top 3 QSR brands. And something that I can say through that experience is that business coach role is really about taking the brand strategy and bringing it to life for everybody else. And so as a business coach, it's your responsibility to kind of play the middleman, the advocate, the person that really drives the change through those conversations and through the relationship between the franchisor and the franchisee. So it's a very powerful position to play. And my personal opinion, I think franchise brands and franchisors can do a better job helping bring those people along and helping develop them for success.
Right, absolutely. And I totally agree with that the role of the business coach is a conduit from the franchisor. So that role exists for that information to flow between the franchisor and the franchisee. So developing that role is, conducive to executing what the franchisor is trying to execute.
Yes.
So I definitely agree with that. I think the knowledge, depending on how the information flows, can benefit everybody, right?
Absolutely.
So, like the one word I like to use for business coaches is conduit.
Yes.
They're definitely a conduit for information flowing not only one way, but from the franchisees as well, because obviously there's those debrief meetings, the feedbacks, and all those things that go on there as well. So, but you're right. Ultimately, that role exists because the franchisor wants to get information flowing top down and I say top down loosely because that's a whole different perspective, even though it's supposed to be a partnership, but from the brand head office to the franchisee and continuing to develop that information throughout the system.
Now, you've been in franchising, a little bit longer than me, but, we're coming with, almost 2 decades of experience between us. And we've seen a lot of change in the industry, especially in the last 5 to 10 years, largely driven by the increase in immigration, the increase in funding that's available for small businesses and newcomers here in Canada. what are some of the skills or conversations that you believe we should be having at the business coach level to help adapt to some of those changes we're seeing in the industry?
That's a great question. I think for everybody that comes in, it's the why and
Mm,
understanding, you know, their first touch with the business. Because um, each franchisor vets their incoming franchisees differently. So having
right.
an understanding of their acumen, their skills, other type of skill sets from business background to service background. Sometimes they have a better service background and they need operational. Sometimes they are operational and they need the service. So really understanding each person individually, which
Mm,
is a time consuming thing, as you know, as a
yeah.
business coach, of
Yeah.
making that connection. And then the thing that is lost is the personal a lot of the
Yeah.
time, where as a business coach, you can have meeting after meeting developing that bond and that trust before you can even dive into, let's say, operational of why a business is not underperforming before they're willing to share that information. So absolutely the conversation has to be bonded on trust before you develop anything else.
Yeah, you hit a key point there on the importance of the relationship, whether
Mm-hmm.
that's, franchisor management to their field coaches or
Mm-hmm.
those field coaches to the franchise partners that they are going to be serving, right? So, would you say are the top three skills? Let's narrow it down. I like threes.
Okay.
I love threes.
Okay.
So, let's narrow it down to three different skills that should be prioritized with effective to make business coaches effective.
For a business coach, you know what I'm going to say, number one, right? Is can they look at the numbers and say, understand what it means when they're going to go in and consult with somebody?
Okay, so I guess to
Is that the
summarize
question?
that, it would be like some analytics or
Yeah. So when you go in and you do analytics with a franchisee, what are those numbers telling you? Because you have to be able to give them feedback about change. So
so
that's
KPIs. So
KP,
KPIs.
some KPIs, yes.
Yeah.
Um, the other thing is relationship building. You have to be a relationship person. So developing that in them as well is very important. So whatever that looks like, there's many ways we can do that, and we
Yeah.
can talk about that on another topic. But like the people and culture development, even at that level, is very important.
Okay, I agree.
And then understanding the business model of the brand.
Mm.
So that can look in every franchise very differently, even if they're similar franchises from QSR to QSR. One pizza brand is not the same as the other, or, hamburger joint the same
Yes.
as the other. So you have to understand the business model and have the franchisee that is now learning the business understand the business model, because they bought into a brand because the model
Works.
hopefully works and is working the way it's supposed to work.
Right.
So to be able to understand that business model and again be a conduit to pass down that information is important. So those are the three things I would say offhand.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the top 3 for me similarly would be the ability to build relationship. And I would actually center everything around that.
Yes.
Whether it be active listening. We have 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason.
Mm-hmm.
Whether it is offering transparency at every opportunity.
Right.
People like to understand the why, and a great way to bring people along for the journey is to explain the why. And I think you brought up a really great point about understanding the business model and the brand values and making sure you're bringing that perspective into every conversation to make sure it's constructive and serves why we're all there, which is to grow the brand and to have a profitable business.
Right.
Yeah.
And I'll just interject something there. So
Yeah.
the one thing I didn't mention is, but for I guess your audience is,
Yeah.
I'm an employment relations guy, right? So that is my background when it comes to business. Now, when I say, people and culture, and I'm also saying, being able to analyze, the two are hugely linked.
Yes.
Because, um, human capital, right? any way you want to term it, is the number one expense that you're going to have. So if you can't navigate that properly and link that to the bottom line,
Yeah.
you're always going to have some sort of disconnect. So to be able to analyze that and also develop the people and culture within, whether it's a franchisee or the top end of the brand, from the C-suite or whatever, it's always important to link the two together, because that's going to affect your bottom line. If your human capital is off, your bottom line is going to be off,
Yeah.
and all those things are not going to be linked. So.
Yeah. Yeah. We often look at sales, we look at costs, we look at labor from a percentage on the dollar, but we don't always, to your point, look at some other metrics like turnover, like how much time does it take to invest, to train someone, to onboard someone, to hire someone. We don't always bring all of that information to the perspective and to the total cost of people.
Right.
Of people.
And one thing I would ask for your audience to think about, like if they're a franchisee or even a franchisor, is if your people are not happy and the culture is not right, how well is your brand doing? And that's food for thought. And I'm sure if most people can answer that themselves. So, that's always the starting point with me, right?
I always say the customer experience will never be better than the employee experience. You have to take care of your employees. You have to take care of your people if you want them to show up for you and you show up for the brand.
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
All right. So I think that wraps the first question. I think we had some good nuggets in there.
Right. And I think that will tie in through a lot of the things that we do, because that's a good first question.
Yeah.
As like we were both mentioning, the business coach role is a conduit to all this other stuff. So it'll probably bleed into the other questions you have today as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I know not every brand is at the place where they can maybe hire or have a full-time business coach, working with them.
Right.
Do you think there's benefit? Maybe this is another quick question. Do you think there's benefit to having an outside consultant come in to do business coaching, or more of an in-house?
The question of ages. It's something that I do, right? Professional development with staff at all levels. And I think it's important. The thing is understanding, again, the business model. And that's why I put it third, because a lot of bigger brands per se, they don't like outside coaches, because not that they don't have the knowledge to coach, but they don't understand the business model intimately. And obviously they want their brand to be built in a certain way. So that question really teeters on what type of coaching, what's the knowledge that is needed for the business coach, because it all depends on the hiring of the franchisor. They check off certain boxes, and then they may need to supplement with additional training or coaching from a consultant. So it depends, how they're hiring on, with whether they need to bring an outside coach in.
Yeah, the way that's a good point, but the way I sort of see it is, it's hard to give feedback sometimes. It's hard to give it. It's hard to receive it. And when there's no psychological safety in the room and people are nervous about how feedback will be received, it can sometimes become a barrier to being honest, becomes a barrier to being transparent, especially if the person that you're talking to maybe holds a higher title or more perceived power than you do. It can be really hard to do. So instead of spending time and effort and energy trying to change that dynamic, sometimes it makes more sense to seek a third-party perspective, someone that can come in whose job is to deliver that honest feedback and can take a less filtered look at some of the processes and problems that you might be experiencing within your organization. So I know we can talk field coaches all day long, but I do want to make sure that we have time to dive into some of the other hot topics and hot takes that we have today. But thank you for your perspective on business coaches.
Sure.
Yeah.
There's a lot there.
Yeah. All right. Time for the next one. All right. Let's talk tariffs. This is going to be a big one. Let's talk tariffs. How will what's going on with tariffs impact franchise systems today?
Wow, that's a loaded question. Because, most people would say right now is, I don't know,
Mm,
right? So if you look at the volatility in the economy, is
yes.
because I don't know, right? That's a lot of what's going on.
Mhm.
Now, if I have to extrapolate from that, right, and say, okay, there's going to be economic change for what's going on, my first inclination will be to say it's going to be supply chain for sure.
Supply chain, yep.
Whether those companies that are outsourcing more, especially from the US, or if they have to change where their supply chain is going from. So, I'll use the auto industry because that's a big one. I know it's not franchising, but they're
Oh,
looking.
there are some franchises in the automotive
Mm-hmm.
industry, like
Yes.
Jiffy, Mr. Lube, right?
Right.
There's lots of different franchise models there.
Right. Right. I say that to say though, because there's a lot of things like auto parts that go back
Mm,
and forth. Now, when you look at food supply and those types of things, how are they going to be affected, right? Obviously, it's going to affect price increases, those types of things, inflation, all those things that are anticipated. Like I said at the beginning, we don't really know, but you
yes.
would expect costs to go up. Now, where do those costs go? Do you eat it, shrink your margins, pass it along? What's really going to happen with these types of things?
Mm,
Most of us can see, you go to the grocery store and you can already see changes from week to week saying, hey, what? I paid
yeah.
that last week and now I'm paying. Now,
Yeah.
so translate it to a franchise and say, okay, now when I walk in there, where are they getting their sourcing their elements for their business? And
Yeah.
how is that going to affect them? And what do they do with that once they analyze those numbers?
Yeah. Yeah, you brought up the perspective of the impact to the franchisor and the responsibility maybe a little bit there. You've talked about a little bit the customer impact and maybe a sticker shock, or where exactly do you funnel those changes to pricing, whether it's at the franchisor level, whether some of it gets passed down to the franchisee and therefore maybe even the customer. Where do you make up the differences? And it's hard to answer that question when we're early in the game, and like you said, there's still a lot of unknowns, right? The way I kind of see tariffs is, I agree, supply chain is going to be where we see it the most, but I actually see it as a pretty unique opportunity for franchising.
Yes.
And I'll tell you why. Here in the GTA in Toronto, we have such a diverse population of people, of cultures, of products, of services right at our fingertips. We don't have to go very far to find brilliant people across the city. And I think this is a great opportunity for whether it's an emerging franchise brand or an established franchise brand to take a look at their supply chain and see where there might be opportunity to connect with the local communities that have grown their brand, helped their brand. They, serves their brand serves these communities. I think this is a great opportunity to actively seek out people, companies, small businesses that can help fill those gaps so that we don't have to take on as much of a cost, so that we don't have to worry too much about what's happening south of the border. We can really hone in on building and developing the communities that we exist in and that we serve. So that's kind of like the way I see it. I see it as an exciting opportunity, though I can understand why it might inspire, fear or uncertainty at this time.
Yeah, and I absolutely agree. A free market always adjusts.
Yeah.
Gaps will be filled, so it's an opportunity right now for entrepreneurs who are inspiring to get in and fill some of those gaps or expand out.
Yeah.
Um, the unfortunate part is that it's usually done with some pain.
Mm.
Wherein markets are changed, especially when you talk about stuff with like trade coming back and forth. Now
Mm.
there is some pain with that because there's cost to even developing, right? So,
Yes.
but in the long term, as they should say, short term pain for long term gain. That's what I believe would be the best, because there's a lot of industries here that we could probably develop by ourselves. There's brands that can expand out,
Yes.
and really grow with the help of consultants. Right?
Yes.
Right. But yeah, definitely there's opportunity in the marketplace if something like this happens. It's just how to navigate that, and what type of pain are we going to go through to try and, develop some of those brands and source new supply chains and those types of things as we go along the way.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. I love that there's opportunity on both sides that help build and grow and add value to the brand. I think it's a beautiful thing, and actually look forward to seeing how franchise brands adapt over the next little while to the changes that are coming down.
Right.
I guess my next kind of follow-up question to that is, what should franchise leaders do right now? What should the communication look like? Should there be communication around tariffs for their franchisees, for their corporate teams, for people who might be looking to hear from franchise leadership? What should the message be?
Right now, it's like, I guess, most things in the market: watch and plan with a contingency. You know, one of the best things you can do is not over panic. Yeah. If you have supply chains and those types of things already in place that are working, don't look to change them just because they're changing, but also start to work towards contingencies, because you don't want to be, left at the last minute looking for change as well. And communicate those with your franchisees, knowing that you have contingencies or a couple options should something need to be changed, very quickly if that happens.
Yeah, I think you make a really great point about taking a proactive approach to the communication. It's okay to say we don't have it all figured out right now. We're not sure, right. But we have a contingency plan in place. We are actively looking to source more local suppliers. These type of things, I think, are important to communicating to your franchise system to help ease some of the nerves, to help people feel like they have support and that right. They're being supported during this turbulent or transitional time. Right. So I think, again, you make a really good point about being proactive. Don't wait until, you have all the answers or think you do. Right. Just tell them what you do know, right? Tell them what you do know.
Honestly, that should be happening anyways. Right. It's the entrepreneurial mindset. Like, whether it's a franchise or a new business owner or somebody's established, you should always be looking to growing, vetting your supply chains and everything you're doing, because if you're not growing, you're stalling. Right. So that should be happening anyways. Yes. This is just a wake up call to say, hey, if tariffs come in, then we should be looking at it as well as other parts of your business model.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's important that you mention the other parts of the business model, because when a topic like tariffs comes front and center and there's so much attention on it, it's easy to get distracted with it and make it bigger than it needs to be. And sometimes you take your eye off of the things that you can right. control and that are within your control. So things like making sure you execute on the brand standard, making sure that your customers are taken care of, your team members are taken care of, not straying from operational standards during tough times, making sure that you're still delivering a consistent experience right. for the brand is really important during these times.
Right. And we're going to go back to the business coach for a second, because this is where a business coach becomes very important, because, one of the things that may happen is that if franchisees and franchisors are not communicating, franchisees will go and find their own solutions. And then, you start to fracture a business model. So communication is very important, that everybody's on the same page and that the brand model stays consistent through it all.
Yes, right? Consistency.
Right. It's better for all stakeholders.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you for that.
Right.
Thank you for that. That was a good one. All right. We got another one on the way. Pick another question.
I could sort of see. No, I'm kidding. There you go.
All right. Ooh. Franchisee versus franchisor. Is it truly a partnership? Where does the power lie?
Wow, that's a
Yeah,
loaded one.
I
That's a
know.
loaded
We're about
one.
to ruffle some feathers, get a little hot in here.
Okay. So I will say it's not mutually exhaustive.
Okay.
Both have power.
Okay.
How they enact the power, the thing for me is for it not to be a struggle. Because, obviously the franchisor sets the business model and the franchisee has ways they can interpret and enact that business model to a limit. Obviously there's the franchise agreement, but they have some power within that too.
Yes.
So it's really how are they enacting those powers unilateral or together, I should say, for the best of the model. So my short answer is the power lies with both, but how are they communicating to go forward, in the same direction?
Yeah, I often like to think of the franchise model as this web and this ecosystem of people and processes that come together to build a brand, right? And within that ecosystem is the franchisor, is the franchisee, is the supply chain, and then all the extensions of that, right? And so the one piece that I think is important to bring light to is acknowledging that there is a power dynamic in the room. There is a power dynamic in the relationship. Franchisors obviously hold a certain power dynamic. It's in the name, franchisor, franchisee, which is why I typically like to use franchise partners. You'll hear that interchangeably throughout the conversations. But there's a dynamic there, and labels matter, and titles matter, and words matter. And so I always like to quote Spider-Man, with great responsibility. Sorry, I'll start again. I always like to quote Spider-Man, with great power comes great responsibility. And when you walk into a room and you know that you're holding a certain level of power, I believe it's your responsibility to lead conversation, to lead change, to lead and create an environment where people feel safe to show up, feel good to show up, where you can have healthy and constructive conversation. And so I think there's some work to do sometimes in the franchise model and the way people operate and businesses operate, where, yes, you can make a decision, you can lead a strategy. We're not taking that power away from you as a franchisor, but acknowledge that there's some power at play and be proactive and intentional with your communication and with your effort to bridge that connection and make it a comfortable and thriving environment for everyone.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
I go a little more PR with it.
Okay.
In the sense that
What's PR? What do you mean PR?
PR, where it's more about rules, right? It's like anything else. Power, when you say the word power, it's when it becomes abusive. When you're enacting rules just because. When a franchisee buys into business, there's a FA and there's rules and guidelines and stuff like that. Adherence to the rules that you've understood or sometimes not understood. And that's sometimes the biggest part of the problem, because, a new entrepreneur coming into a business doesn't really understand.
There's some things you can't understand until you get in there,
exactly,
right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so when we say power, when, I like to use that very narrowly, is when a franchisor becomes abusive with it. And that sometimes happens, like let's say somebody, I'll use an example of an FA where, a franchisee is supposed to be in their unit 40 hours a week, but they have an illness in the family. And the franchisor says, well, you're not there, and they want to oust them because of whatever political reason. That's power, right? Now, when there's an AWOL, let's say franchisee, just because he wants a vacation and the business is failing, and they use that same guideline to oust that person, there's a different dynamic there. So, guardrails, regulations, for me, it's okay because the business model has to be the business model for the best of all. It's when the power becomes abusive. And I think that's the real question here, because we've seen that
Yeah.
too many times where it
Yeah.
becomes abusive for the interest of one stakeholder rather than,
Looking at the whole ecosystem.
Right. So, that's why I'm saying it works both ways, because again, from the franchisee perspective, playing that side of the coin, they have certain abilities to act autonomously as well.
Yes.
Which may not be in the best interest. So, for example, some brands don't have regulations on price setting.
Right.
And, COVID was a big one where I've seen franchisees undercut their other franchise partners, and it was just disastrous. So they're enacting that power to the, not for the benefit of other franchisees and those types of things. So, for me, it's always important to term, power in the sense that we're talking about it as when it becomes abusive, not regulatory.
Yeah. Yeah, so we're exploring the word power in a few different ways, and I think that's really important for this conversation. Right. I touched on, titles and words and how that kind of plays into the dynamic. You touched on abuse of power and how that sometimes trickles down, and when you're not considering other stakeholders or the ecosystem in decision making. Right. And, I think another piece on the power is the power of influence.
Yes.
The power of, who holds the power to influence the reputation of the brand. And at the end of the day, franchisors do, obviously, with things like leading strategy, but franchisees do as well, because they are the piece that executes that strategy.
Yes.
And brand consistency is all about how we lead strategy, but also how we execute that strategy, right? And so what steps or what trends or what systems do you see today being used to help create a more balanced approach to building brands through distribution of power or through communication channels that help, I guess, bring both people to the table, both sides to the table?
Right. So, we talked about communication, because, both, like you said, both the franchisor and the franchisees have a part to play. Franchise partners have a part to play in keeping the business model on point to the benefit of all. Now, another hot topic will be the FAC.
Yes.
Because the brands that have
so for our viewers who don't know what an FAC is, what is an FAC?
Go ahead.
No, I want you to explain. You brought it up, so you can explain.
What's an FAC? It's a franchise council, basically.
Franchise Advisory Council.
Right.
Yeah.
It's basically made up of franchisees or sometimes different elements within the brand to be an advisory to the franchisor from both sides to develop challenges and new innovative stuff for the brand.
Yes.
So that's really what that is.
Yeah.
When that is working well,
communication
is great. So that's one of the things that, I would advise to look at is how that is functioning. When that's not working well, it's sort of a microcosm to the macro that's going on in the brand, because it really is a tell on how the brand is developing, positively or negatively, and who is the power broker, if you want to really say, because you can have a lot of truth come out in those FACs.
So my experience with FACs or franchise advisory councils is a little bit limited in some ways. I've worked with brands that utilize the group effectively to ensure that there's a feedback loop between franchisor and franchisee. Where I've seen it work well is when it's an elected group of folks, not just someone people who were just handpicked by the guy at the top. I've seen it work well there. I've seen it work well when there's an established system and process for collecting feedback and delivering feedback. When you put a council together and you don't have a clear objective and you don't have a clear process in place that explains to everyone why you're there and what you hope to achieve, it can easily become what it's not intended to be, right? It can become a place where people just talk about their woes. It can be a place where, franchisor might not be in a place where they feel that they need to hear the voice of the franchisee, or they feel they have a pulse on it already through their business coaches or whatnot. I'd like to see councils like, the FAC or groups or whatever, like the FAC, come together more consistently with franchise brands. And if not that, if you're not trying to do something so official, just putting something in place so that there is a way to have a feedback loop between the franchisor and the franchisee, whether that's engagement surveys, whether that's newsletters, whether that's quarterly calls, or twice a year calls that brings everyone together and they have a space to share their feedback and be heard. Because I'm sure you would agree, as a business coach, a lot of the times when you're dealing with underperformance, disengagement, or even a poor customer experience, when you get down to the root of it, it's really about a misunderstanding or someone, showing their frustration through a lack of information, a lack of communication, a lack of direction. So people want to be heard. And I think when you're operating within a franchise system and people have the ability to really impact the brand reputation, it has to be prioritized. Feedback loops have to be prioritized.
Yes, absolutely. So a lot of the elements that you say is, the ideal thing for an FAC.
Yeah.
The other word I would add to it is a big part of FAC is clarity.
Yeah.
A lot of time, franchise partners believe that the franchisor is not very transparent in what's going on.
Do you agree? Do you agree that there's a lack of transparency usually on that side?
I won't say yay or nay, because different brands do different things. I've seen some that are super clear.
Yeah.
And the franchise partners love it, right? A big thing is about opening new units. Well, you've developed this Toronto market, and I'm going to put 1-2 blocks from you. That conversation happens before it even opens, those types of things, right?
Mm-hmm.
So clarity is a big part of that, and communications around that, and new innovation, right? So new innovations where they bring it to the franchise partner, and I'm going to go off topic for a little sideways for a little bit. And a good FAC should have segments, right? So people who are franchise partners who have been in the brand for a long time, for a little while, that are new, not just
reflective of the population.
Yes, absolutely. So when these things are happening and new innovations are coming, well, you're not talking to one segment, especially when it's a bigger brand, right?
Yes.
To one segment of your franchise partners, you're talking to all to really figure out how you're moving forward. Again, that's when it's working well.
Yeah.
Now, when it's not working out, franchisors are communicating, but they're more mandating, saying, this is what we're going to do. Here's the clarity. We are opening one in your area, maybe 2 or 3.
Yeah. Because we said so.
No, but really, it's live or leave.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. So those types of things. So that's why there's balances between what a franchisor who wants to work with franchise partners to develop the brand, and franchise partners who want to lead the brand, right?
Yeah.
In their way, right?
Yeah. I'm glad you brought that example up.
The power.
Yeah.
That, and I don't even want to say abuse of power, because I know one thing is that an FAC is always for feedback.
Yes.
Feedback meaning the franchisor is still going to make
has the
decision.
Power to make the decision. Absolutely.
Right. So, which is not right or wrong, but it's good to have the input from the franchise partners, and then you do what you will with it.
Yeah. And I mean, a franchise is successful because it's built on proven systems. And
Correct.
it's hard sometimes to convince people to take another look at those systems or change those systems or innovate those systems when why can't I continue doing what I've always done when what I've
Yes.
done has always worked?
Right.
Right. Um, but again, when you take that proactive approach and just take the feedback in, you might
Hmm.
uncover opportunities that you never knew existed. When you
Right.
tap into your local communities, which is where your franchise partners live and exist and operate, you're able to add a perspective to the conversation and to the decision making that you might not have been able to uncover before.
Right.
And so, whether it be through the FAC, whether it be through business coaches, whether it's through surveys that are sent out periodically over the course of the year, whether it's providing feedback on how well or not well a promotion went, right? It gives people visibility, it gives people transparency, and that is what really helps build trust in those relationships.
Right. And just, I guess, tying it back into the question about who really holds the power, it's making sure that neither side is push or pull,
Yeah.
right? It should be really a unified thing saying, these are our interests, these are the franchisor interests, even when
The
they're
brand
different.
interest.
Yeah. Even
Mhm.
when they're differing, to say, okay, this is what we want to talk about, communicate
Mhm.
about moving the brand forward. So, and now just looping it back to tariffs. So tariffs can be a big win or a
Mhm.
big one where the franchisor can say, this is our solution. You take
Mhm.
it to the FAC, and you may have franchise partners on the FAC say, there's a better way of doing this. And
Mhm.
then you have the communication, right? And then you can go forward with the best solution for all. So that's, for me,
Mhm.
ideally how it should work, with a lot of
Mhm.
communication going on.
Mhm. Yeah, I always champion collaboration.
Yes,
That is, look at a way to come problem or find a solution in a way that feels like collaboration. Yeah,
absolutely.
love it, love it. So we'll do one more question.
Okay. Okay.
Go ahead and pick a topic out of the bag.
I'm not looking. Oh, my favorite. No, I'm kidding.
Oh, I love this question. Okay. So the question is, what makes a great franchise leadership team? Is it about
Uh,
following systems, innovation, or people management? Or it could be something else, but some thought starters.
wow. Okay. So I'm going to go way back to my employment relations days. And you're going to love my one line answer on this is diversity, right? Singularity gets you in a singular place. Diversity helps you expand out and grow. I mean, by nature of the word, right? So I'll always say first word is diversity.
Mm. It's interesting that you use diversity to answer that question
Mm-hmm.
because I wasn't expecting that.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell us a little bit more about what you mean by diversity? I think there's a lot of definitions about what that is out there. So I'd love to hear your perspective on it and how it relates to franchising.
Okay, so there's a saying that never hire similar to me,
Hmm.
because if you hire similar to me, you're going to get the same thing.
Hmm.
You hire diversely so you can be diverse. You can be agile. You can have different thoughts, those types of things.
Hmm.
And with that, you can problem solve. If you're always hiring similar to me, right? And there's a lot of ways we can take that, right? Whether it's education, whether it's culture, whether it's, experience, you're going to get the same thing over and over again if you say,
Yeah.
this is a perfect fit because they have the exact same thing
Oh,
as
don't
me.
get me started on cultural
Right,
fit and
right,
what that even means.
right. But I mean, that's that's a different thing. But that's part of diversity. And when I say that, I mean that as well.
Yeah.
And I mean that more so because you get ingrained with a certain mindset,
Mm.
and take that for what it means, right? You get ingrained with a certain mindset
Mm.
of doing things a certain way.
Mm.
If you always do things a certain way, you will never be agile. You continue to run a certain way. And this is where you have, I'm going to use the blockbuster analogies
Great example. Yeah.
where they believed that Netflix will never outsell them because people just pick up videotapes from the store and they return it, and that streaming will never be able to, fill that void.
Okay, pause for a second before we go down the loop of where that brand went wrong or where they could have made a different choice. Let's talk about Blockbuster for a second, because we probably have some viewers here who have never been to a Blockbuster, just have probably heard it in passing. I'll tell you about my experience with Blockbuster and really the connection I had to that brand. I remember Blockbuster being the place to go to on a Friday night to catch a hot movie. Pack the siblings up, or even if it's a date night situation where you walk in, you have all these different genres of movies. You got the comedies, you got the horrors, you got, the vintage stuff over here. And you walk the aisles and you take a look at what's new and you pick something off the shelf and you go over here and you get some snacks. Yep, Blockbuster had snacks too. And, you feel a part of the experience. You talk to people about their recommendations. You read the back of a of a DVD or a Blu-ray and you get the synopsis of a movie maybe you never heard. There might be a section of staff picks or what people recommend. And so it really was not just a movie thing or a place to get movies. It was an experience. And a lot of my core memories growing up as a big sis of about 6 or 7 siblings was packing everybody up in the car, taking a drive over to Blockbuster, renting a few movies, heading back home, and honestly making more than a night about it. It'd be a night and the next day too, Yeah, a great experience. And, a part of me wishes Blockbuster was still around, nowadays, but we're in the era of Netflix. And you can, I guess, tell us a little bit about how we got here.
Right. So I use that example to say that the world is changing.
Yeah.
And if you're not agile, like Blockbuster thought they will always be top dog, and they never believed that streaming would evolve the way it was, and they weren't agile. Now take it forward to a more relevant or a more timely example, Zoom. Whoever thought Zoom would have blown up from person-to-person meetings and all these online meetings and those types of things. So just the evolving space. But again, it's agile minds within these companies saying, these are ways we can evolve. These are ways we can do things, right? So having that singular focus can literally kill a brand is what I'm getting at if you're not agile. And that comes from hiring the same people who keep telling you, people will always want to pick up videos from our store or do things, meet in person and these types of things, and not having that, agile leadership to speaking to the question to say, no, innovation is coming. And I know, the big talk is the next one, AI.
Yeah.
Well, if you ignore AI, what do you think is going to happen with your brand? These examples that I've brought up, if you're ignoring AI and you're not staring into it, what will happen? You see a lot of these brands developing and changing very quickly. Another example would be Facebook. Now Meta. Why? Because they're already looking down the road and saying, we need to be agile with this, or we will, even though they're Facebook, we will die. Right? So this is where I'm saying about, don't hire similar to me. Diversity in many forms is what is needed in, a successful leadership.
Yeah. I think you touched on a couple of different examples outside of the franchising space, which I think is great to add context to the conversation. But I'd like to kind of bring it back a little bit to your point on diversity and how that has an impact on the franchising industry today. We spoke a little bit earlier about the franchisee population and how that's really changing and shifting and how it's made a massive shift over the last, 5-10 years. And something I think we don't always look at is how not having a diverse franchisee population can have a negative impact on a brand or a brand's ability to expand. Do you have any thoughts about specifically how diversity is approached with onboarding new franchise partners?
Yes, definitely diversity is needed. And I'll preface that by saying within the client avatar that fits the business model.
Mm-hmm.
Because again, getting locked in a certain thing is not always good,
Mm-hmm.
but knowing who's going to be successful within that mindset. So, one of the things I see biggest is within franchise systems, those systems that need a sales mindset from their franchisee, and they onboard somebody who does not have that sales mindset, then you're going to have a problem, right? Diversity.
Now, no, I want to stop you there for a second because you said we're going to have a problem. And there are some skills that I believe can be taught, right?
Yes.
We have a lot of franchise owners who buy a car dealership style franchise who don't know much about cars. Does that mean that they can't be successful? Can someone who isn't a trained esthetician buy or own a spa or a beauty franchise without necessarily going through that formal training?
My answer to that is there are two different things. So somebody learning service is one thing. What I'm specifically talking to is stuff that is like sales B2B, where you have to connect with other businesses to be successful. You have to be doing a lot of outreach. So that's a different mindset. So when we talk diversity in that way, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I know where you're getting at is
Yeah.
you're talking cultural diversity.
Mm-hmm.
And again, cultural diversity,
Experience. Mm-hmm.
right? In that space, again, it has to fit the client avatar for the brand.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, I'm looking how it fits,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm. I'm going to toss this to the side because I know we're going to be wrapping up soon,
Right.
but I'm going to toss a curveball at you.
Okay.
Can someone who is from a Caribbean background
All right.
open up or purchase a franchise that serves Asian cuisine?
Absolutely.
Okay. But it's not a direct cultural fit.
No, when we say cultural fit,
Yeah.
I'm talking about two different things.
Okay, yeah. Let's
right?
clarify it for people. Let's
Right.
clarify it for
Cultural
people.
fit, there's one with brand culture, brand standards, and those types of things. And the other is service offering.
Mm-hmm.
So where you're saying, I guess, is the disconnect between service offering, about a Caribbean offering, an Asian offering to the public. That can be done because it's a service model. Now, there's other demographics that will say, will that work or not work in different areas, different communities, obviously. But in general, I would say no. It's not a problem to have a person of a different cultural background to have an offering that may not be a fit if it's service.
Just because it's not the same doesn't mean it's not a fit.
Correct.
Right?
Right?
Yeah.
But again, like I will always preface, there's so many other dynamics that go into that to say whether it's a fit or not a fit. Like for me, okay, so for me, I'm going to use my word of the day. Cultural is negligible in that type of thing because there's so many other boxes that need to be checked before you grant somebody a franchise partnership.
Okay, so if we're steering the conversation back to the leadership piece and what skills are needed to help navigate, I guess, building an inclusive environment, an inclusive brand that celebrates the diversity that we've been talking about, what would be one or two things that franchisors can do to help bridge that gap and create those environments and more inclusive brands, and maybe something that franchisees can also do to contribute positively?
Yeah, I would want to say that for leadership, I would want to be successful in all communities, right? Meaning you're not looking, again, to be similar to certain communities. If you're really looking to expand and have diversity in different cultures, you're going to look at that and see where the fits are and where the check boxes are to be able to develop your brand in that way and say, yeah, we're diverse, we're serving A community, B community, rural, urban, those types of things, and you're going to really be agile in that. And that goes again back to me saying having agile leadership, not just saying, oh, it's always worked in, let's say, rural communities, it'll never work in urban, or vice versa. So that's where I'm really looking at to say, yeah, let's be agile with this. Let's serve all communities. And then we really get a diversity from cultural background and cultural from the system itself.
Brand culture, right?
Yeah,
the brand culture.
Itself.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I think leaders can do a better job connecting with their local communities that they serve. And that can be through the relationship with the franchise partner who is owning, operating, serving in that community. That is making sure that there is that feedback channel to say, hey, this is working well in my market. This, maybe we can look at adapting something to make it more effective or successful in my market. And just being open to having those conversations and shifting your mindset to exploring the local communities and being intentional with those efforts, I think is key.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And again, for leadership, you want to have to develop that.
Yeah.
Right? Because a lot of
curiosity. Be curious.
No, but a lot of leaders, I mean, in the franchise world, and I guess it's human nature, you want to do the things that made you successful. Right? So bringing in new innovative leaders to say, hey, no, it can work in this way, in this market.
Have you looked at it this way?
Right.
Right? This is the experience I've had with this, or I've seen this work in a similar model or a similar situation. Just bringing that fresh set of eyes and perspective to the conversation.
Right. And I don't know if you know, that's actually one of the things I did, right, is looking at those different markets demographically to say, hey, let's look at this market and plant somewhere we haven't planted before. I would get a lot of pull and feedback of, yes, we can go here, no, we can't. But it was for me to make the case to say, no, we need to be here, even though we haven't been in this space before. So, I mean, that's the type of thing you need to be agile.
And I love that you bring in the data and then look at the financials and you look at the numbers and you look at the data that's available, the hard numbers.
Right.
But I also think it's important to look at the qualitative data, the conversations, the community connection, how franchise partners are showing up in their local markets to make it happen for the brand.
Absolutely.
Yeah. This has been honestly like such a great conversation. We could probably talk for another 20 minutes on this topic on franchise leadership and why it's so important and core to brand success.
Yeah, absolutely.
I've enjoyed thoroughly this conversation. Thank you so much for joining us. And I want to take a few minutes to have you talk about where people can connect with you if they're interested in your services or having a conversation with you. Where can people find Roger?
Yeah, for me, you can find me at probusiness911.com. That's my website, and reach out to me personally. Or you can find me on LinkedIn. And if you go to probusiness911.com, you'll find me on LinkedIn, Instagram, and those other social media as well. So that's the best way. And always feel free to reach out to me. I'm very responsive to all.
Thank you. Awesome. Thank you so much, Roger.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Great talk.
Thank you so much, everyone, for joining, for listening to this hot conversation. I hope that you are walking away feeling empowered, inspired, and curious about the opportunities within your franchise systems. Join us again next time for more hot takes with hot perspectives. So if you enjoyed today's conversation and are curious to learn more, like, share, and subscribe to Hot Perspectives, and keep watching.